May I speak in the name of one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning, St. Margaret's. Very blessed 17th Sunday after Pentecost to you. I thought I'd start off this morning by sharing an article I ran across this week. A very interesting article about the disconnect between Americans' perception of our economy and the actual condition of our economy. Now, put simply, we Americans are really rather unreliable narrators when it comes to our nation's economic health. That is, even though unemployment is at a 50-year low, with household savings up and bankruptcies down, the majority of consumers still assume economic challenges to appear in the next year. Now, according to the article, what's driving this disconnect, and this is what was so interesting, is our inability to see how we relate to the broader economy. In other words, when you ask Americans how they are doing economically, most of them report good news. But when you ask them how everyone else is doing, they instantly become negative. In a lot of ways, it's similar to how people talk about being stuck in traffic, as if traffic were some foreign and hostile condition that we contend with on a daily basis. It's not. It's not. That's not what traffic is. No, the reality is this. Friends, we're never stuck in traffic. We are traffic. Me and you, right? I mean, think about it. We are that car that someone behind us is lamenting, maybe cursing, who knows? And that's exactly what we do, right? Whenever we see traffic slowing ahead of us, we lament the car that's right in front of us, not realizing that people do the same behind us. Now, to be fair, it can be difficult to grasp how we fit in with the world all around us. We humans are notoriously bad at self-assessment. It depends on the culture, but most of us either wildly overestimate or wildly underestimate our own skills and abilities. We likewise struggle to understand the complexity of our society. And we struggle to understand just how it is we fit in with that larger world that's just beyond our tunnel vision. If you're here last week, you'll recall how I talked about the gift of attention, of paying attention. And how related to that gift of paying attention is the ability to see people as they really and truly are. And this week, in our gospel text this week, and what I want to talk about this week, I see it as a continuation of what I explored last Sunday. And it's for this reason, bound up in the act of paying attention and seeing others as they truly are is our ability to see ourselves as we truly are. Bound up in that story last week of the servant, who's forgiven so much and then refuses to extend forgiveness. Bound up in that story is a stunning lack of self-awareness. He doesn't see himself. He doesn't know himself. He doesn't understand himself. In a lot of ways, that's the fundamental failure of that servant from that story from last week. That servant failed to grasp the cruel irony of pleading, begging for, and then receiving infinite mercy, only to then turn around and to refuse to extend even a drop of mercy. This brings us to this week. And we have another parable from Jesus. In a lot of ways, the lessons are so similar. This parable happens to be one of my favorites to preach on because I think it really can teach us something profound about God, the God that we serve and the God that we follow, as well as something really rather profound about ourselves, who we really are. This is a story about God and how the kingdom that God is fashioning in our midst, even now, even in this moment, is so different from the little palaces and fiefdoms we build for ourselves. This is an image of the world turned upside down, inside out, where, in the words of Jesus, the first will be last, and the last will be first. The image goes like this. The kingdom of heaven, as Jesus explains, is like a landowner who goes out early in the morning seeking laborers for his vineyard. Now, the landowner is a fair man. He's a fair man, and he comes to an agreement with several workers early in the day that he would pay them the going rate for a day's labor. Normal, ordinary, typical stuff for a landowner or a manager, more likely, of a landowner. But then something unusual happens, something strange unfolds. The man returns mysteriously at 9, and he sees people standing idle. This time, though, instead of negotiating with them, he simply hires them on the spot. And he tells them he's going to pay them whatever is right. Whatever's right. The landowner does this again at noon, and then again at 3, and then finally at 5, an hour before the day's end. By this point, most of the laborers, a majority of the laborers, working there in the vineyard, they've engaged in no negotiations with the landowner. No, they've worked, they've offered their labor, trusting simply that the landowner is going to do the right thing. And that's exactly what the landowner does. He instructs his manager to pay everyone, beginning with those chosen last, those who began work at 5. The ones who had worked only an hour, they receive a day's wages, as does everyone else, including those who had negotiated their pay there in the darkness of a very early morning. This prompts a bit of grumbling on the part of those the landowner had hired first. They lament the generosity of the landowner, wishing he had paid them more than the amount originally agreed upon by the parties. The landowner, though, he responds with really a rather good point. He explains that he was not at all unfair with those initial hires. And after all, they had agreed upon a specific wage, and that's exactly what he paid. But what should be obvious by now, and the point of the story, is that the landowner is not interested in the art of negotiation. No, the landowner is much more passionate about searching out the unwanted and the idle and offering them not what is owed, but rather what is right. Viewed from a certain perspective, it's a rather unusual business model. This now leads me to the first point that I want to share with you this morning, which is this. God's economy is not our economy. God's ways are not our ways. God's economy, in fact, could not be any more different than the ways we humans navigate our world. We humans value what we measure, and we measure what we value. We focus only on what is due until the moment grace appears, and we demand more as if it were somehow our right. We stand We stand on the shoulders of others, countless others. And yet we believe in our hearts that every good thing we've received, every good thing we've been given, has somehow been earned. We have enough. Friends, we have enough. And yet we become so caught up in others that we end up feeling like everything around us is scarce, feeling like we've been wronged. To borrow from another of Jesus' parables, how often are we content to play so well the role of older brother, someone who responds to a lost brother's unexpected and rather beautiful return with nothing more than resentment? It's a good thing then that God is in charge, is it not? Because unlike us, God's economy is fueled by grace. God's economy is pure grace all the way down at every step. God searches people out, lifts them up, invites them in. God gives those things that are far beyond human negotiation. Yet they are still true and right and oh, so beautiful. And God's grace never adds up. It can't be calculated. It can never be presumed. It can only be embraced. But simply, God's grace is amazing. It transcends every possible human invention, calculation, or creation. That's the first lesson for us this morning, that God's economy, God's kingdom is so wondrously different from human-made institutions, fiefdoms, and dominions. Second point, second lesson I want you to hear from me is this, and it's a good one. I love this. This is good news. In the end, we are all 5 o'clock workers. We are all 5 o'clock workers. To help explain what I mean by this, though, I want to first say something about the differences between a parable and an allegory. First, when it comes to allegories, the way they're designed in such a way that every element of an allegory is supposed to reveal something deeper or more profound, right? And this fact makes them so different from parables, especially the parables of Jesus. No, when it comes to Jesus and his parables, there's often a single point that he's trying to make. And then he uses these rather poetic images and these dramatic stories to try and convey that point. And so, in my mind, the way that I read the parables of Jesus, I try not to break them down too much. I try to focus on that main point. And so I want you to hear this from me when it comes to the workers there in the morning. Those early morning workers, the ones that actually negotiated with the landowner, they're pure artistic license on the point of Jesus. Make no mistake, to be human is by definition to be something of a late arrival. Each one of us is a late arrival. You're a late arrival. I'm a late arrival. We all know what it's like to be idle and alone, to be unsure and so afraid. We all stand in need, desperate need of God's mercy. We all receive from God far more than we could ever earn or merit. And when God finds us, it's always at the end of the day, when we're at our lowest, our most distant, our most uncertain. Because that's when God is most generous. That's when God gives us those things we don't deserve, but we desperately need. A lot like last week, I'm going to wrap up my sermon by trying to circle back to that place where I began. First thought that I shared with you is, I shared with you the challenge of understanding not just our world, having eyes not simply to see our world, but the importance of seeing ourselves and seeing our place in this world. And I want to share with you that there is something so wondrously freeing, so liberating about grasping who we really are and what it is God wishes to accomplish in us and through us. There are many vices of our age. There are many vices of our age. The pride of life, the dissatisfaction with what we've been given, the heartache of believing that there's something out there somewhere, just out of reach, that's waiting to make us whole. All of these things have a way of disappearing once we realize the lateness of the hour and the goodness of God's grace. And so my final invitation to you is to take a good look at the clock and open yourself up to what God can do. When you see yourself, and you see God, and you trust that God can do all those things that our world cannot. Put aside that temptation to grumble, to judge, to condemn, to feel aggrieved. And see what happens when you navigate this world from a place of humility, a place of gratitude, a place of joy, and a place of trust. I'm convinced that God really wants to do something remarkable in our midst, in this community. And it starts with you. It starts with all of us coming to this place in just this way. And so let's come together. Let's do these things. Let's open up our hearts, our lives, our very souls. And let's share in the profound abundance that is the goodness and mercy of God. Let's share in it together. And let's be changed. Amen.